Hi, my name is Jessica Morgan, and this is my project, Thoughts and Prayers. This project grew out of my background in theological studies and my interest in spiritual practices. I completed a graduate degree at seminary and then switched tracks to visual art. Working in both worlds, I found that there was a lot of common ground between spiritual practices like prayer and art practice. Both types of work are introspective and are not particularly valuable in contemporary culture. But it used to be, and in many cultures, it still is the case that these worlds coexist, often in the same space. Even now, I think many people visit galleries to contemplate, to be challenged, to think through the big questions of life. So I was interested in what artists had to say about this. I narrowed my focus to a commonplace phrase, thoughts and prayers. These words have become really problematic, glibly used by people in power to avoid action. I think it can also function in a similar way on a personal level. My thoughts and prayers are with you can become something we say when we just don't know what to say or do. So I sent out my call for artist participants just as the pandemic hit. With everything that was happening in the world, the meaning of thoughts and prayers was transforming before my eyes. First, there was a shutdown and then mass protests in response to police brutality and the pandemic itself, people getting sick and dying, while most of us are stuck in our homes with not a lot to do, but think about the state of the world. I knew that artists are generally reflective, thoughtful people, but I was still really surprised at the level of insight, the level of vulnerability artists shared with me about this topic. And it made me feel really honored that they trusted me with their stories. I asked artists what they thought about the phrase thoughts and prayers. What situations or feelings came to mind when they heard it, even if they had ever used it themselves. We then discussed if there was a difference between these paired words. Is a thought for someone different than a prayer for someone? I then asked artists to remember a time they thought about someone they cared about, and during this pandemic, it wasn't hard for people to think of that person. And I had them imagine this thought as an object they would carry around with them. These objects ranged in shape and size. Some were comfortable and easy to carry. Others were difficult or awkward objects that could get in the way of everyday tasks. One artist even described a small object that might be easily lost or overlooked in the clutter of his life. We did something similar with prayers. I asked artists to remember a time they prayed or were present during a prayer. Since a prayer tends to have a directionality to it, I asked participants to imagine the prayer as a moving thing, moving out of the mouth of the speaker, for example, and toward its destination, wherever that might be. Externalizing the prayer in this way, giving it a shape and allowing it movement, really changed the way we experience the prayer. It became less about the value of this spiritual practice and more about letting this prayer live and move and just be what it is. When the interviews were complete, I transcribed parts of each conversation by hand. This was part of the listening process for me and really helped me focus on what the artists were saying and remember the objects that they had described. After transcription, I began drawing the objects. I do this by using black gesso and colored pencil. I'm drawing on this woven jacquard fabric on the floor, and I have to kneel while I'm drawing it. So the process of drawing ends up referencing traditional prayer postures. The last question I asked artists was if they thought people prayed for them in their work. Most of them laughed when I asked this. Very telling of how artists feel they're perceived in society, how much or how little their work is valued. In the interviews and with this question, I decided to make a prayer bead for each. Beads are used in almost every religious tradition as a way to assist prayer or meditation. As you feel the beads, you're able to focus on your prayer. So I'm making a bead for each artist out of unfired clay, and I use this process called burnishing, where I rub each bead with a hard object over kind of an extended period of time. So as I'm making these beads, I'm thinking and praying for each artist's practice.
When I hear the thoughts and prayers phrase, I think actually of American gun violence. That's the most sort of recent and urgent thing that comes to mind. In particular, I think of Republican tweets.
I'm a very strong believer in prayer and meditation and the power of that. But the power of that needs to accompany something, some action, in order to bring that energy or to help. Because I think everything begins at thought, right? So to bring that forward, the intent has to be there, and I think the energy follows. So that could be through meditation, through prayer, and through actions, you know?
I immediately think of death. I immediately think of funerals or times when you're kind of in a low point, and that's someone's response is like, oh, sending you, positive vibes or, thoughts and prayers and that kind of thing.
I think the prayer part is communicating that, like, not only are you in that person's thoughts, but they're having like wishful thoughts about what they want for you.
The sad thing is that the stuff that I think of most immediately has to do with gun violence in the United States and the thoughts and prayers to victims of mass shooting that goes out. So to me, in terms of like having a visual or like an immediate visceral, that's the thing that's associated with that phrase, that's what comes to mind, which in many ways is too bad because I like both thoughts and prayers. But that phrase, that's what that invokes.
Good wishes. I was trying to define, as you were speaking, like the difference between a thought and a prayer. Just in this moment, I think it's about sending good wishes or sending a moment with that person. And you're trying to express it. You're trying to say, I took a moment for you, whatever context or intensity that may be. It's just a way to say, like, I've thought about you and what it is that I know about you and your situation. A very like Western way of responding is to brush it off, to brush off kind of like the discomfort of knowing what the situation might be and not wanting to go further into that in conversation right in that moment. It's kind of the opposite of what I just said, in that you don't really want to give it that space and time. It's almost like I'm fine, like, how are you? I'm fine. No one really is asking how you are, because the moment you answer that with something deeper or that needs more time, it's not what people are asking for.
I think it's as light as a bubble. Like, you blow bubbles, like made out of.
Very light. So if you were to touch this thought, run your fingers across it, what would you feel?
I'm imagining a movie scene where thoughts are bubbles, and you touch the bubble, and it makes you it makes you feel sort of joyous and connected.
Something comforting would come to mind, probably, but heavy, something weighty. I mean, for the concern to be substantial and the care is substantial. So I would go with like, a blanket or something like that. Something substantial, like a heavy blanket or sort of a comforter. Something like that. That would be kind of an image.
I thought of like a little gold kind of locket, like, the ones that you put pictures in.
Is there a physical sensation as you touch it, or more of an emotional sensation?
It makes you like, gives you a jolt of warmth.
Hmm. Does it is it malleable? Does it respond to your hands in any way?
To me, it's almost like the way that ghosts are visualized in movies. So you go through it and it affects
Mhm.
you, but you don't affect it.
Mhm. So
And
it's kind of immaterial.
yeah, and ultimately that others can access it too. Like the idea that it's in a sort of not parallel universe, but it's operating independently of sort of the wind that you're pushing around of your finger as you try and poke it or something.
And in terms of weight, just like very heavy.
I see it as light, like prismatic light.
Mhm.
I was kind of, letting my eyes blur on a candle late at night. And um, what I saw was it wasn't the flame, but it was like a refraction of light that I felt connected me to this source, right? It was coming towards me, but also it felt reciprocal.
It's slowly and very awkwardly. Yeah, it's trying. It's trying its best.
Trying its best. Oh, I love that.
I imagine it sort of like a heavy smoke
Mm.
that sort of like sits really heavily in the air.
Would you say that the smoke rises or does it fall down to the ground?
I think it sort of just stays like at mid height
Mm.
and sort of like loops around itself and trails away to wherever it's going after a while.
It's sort of an electric spark passing through a wire. I envision it slightly like a sparkler, for like a kid's birthday. Five people worldwide.
Yeah.
Like the diversity of human experience is amazing, such that I'm confident that exists, right? That people do, but people might mean like five people. Maybe five people per million. I don't know.
I've never considered that. Um, I think so. I think definitely people think about art, and that's been. I mean, there has been a shift to that. Certainly, as people like, it's a joke, but like we're all sitting on the couches, and at least early on in the contagion, and we're all away from work and we're watching Netflix or whatever it is. That's art. It's art that's sustaining you, by the way. We're listening to podcasts, we're listening to music. And so I do think that there was, at least initially, I think, an awakening of the importance of art. I don't know if people do consciously pray for artists. I like that question though. I kind of want to maybe do that. Now that I think of it.
It's funny, I've never thought about if someone's praying for artists. For some, I don't know, I guess my gut reaction is no. That it's not a concern when there's so much stuff happening in the world, wars, famines, illness, political upheaval, everything. So I feel that artists would, creating art in many ways is a luxury. That, if your basic needs aren't being met, it's very difficult then to be in a place to create, right, and have the means to do so. So I'm gonna say no. That's my final vote.
It's a funny thought. Oh my gosh. I guess my immediate reaction gives away. That just seems so baffling. I don't know. I don't think people even think about artists, really. That's been my experience. So I don't know why they pray for them.
I don't know. Like, I know people who pray for me, so therefore I trust they're praying for me as an artist.
Yeah.
And I know they do pray for me as an artist. I don't know that it's something that I have seen prayed for with any regularity, aside from me as a person who is an artist being prayed for.